This meeting is being recorded.
All right. So without disclosure out of the way, I would like to introduce our guest speaker this evening, Leslie Mackinnon. Leslie has maintained a private psychotherapy practice for over 4 decades and presents both nationally and internationally on issues that impact individuals and families conceived through adoption and third-party reproduction. She's been on Good Morning America, CNN, and was featured in Dan Rather's investigative report, Adoption or Abduction, and was also on the Katie Couric show with her oldest son, Pete. If you're like me, you may recognize Leslie's story from the book, The Girls Who Went Away, and the documentary, A Girl Like Her. And she also serves on the board of Cub. She was drawn in this field after placing her 2 firstborn sons for adoption when she was a teenager. And now today, her passion is in educating therapists and bringing the public's perception of adoption and third-party reproduction in line with reality. So please, everyone, welcome Leslie in the chat. And Leslie, I will turn it over to you.
Woohoo! Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the very familiar faces I see who have heard this story so many times are like, I could tell it for you, Leslie. But I know there are some new faces that haven't heard it. So what I decided to do is I'm divvying it up. I'm going to talk about the ugly, and then I'm going to talk about the good, and then I'm going to talk about how to engage our butts and get out there and work and educate the rest of the world. Because guys, we're starting to have an impact. The tide is turning. I've been saying this just the last couple of years. I can feel it. God knows from when I began, and God knows Joyce will tell us from when she began. Things were so slow to move, but now we're starting to see it. I mean, books are hitting the, major airways. So things are shifting, but I'm going to start with my personal story of the loss that I experienced. And it started, I was your typical high school cheerleader with the, high school football player, etc. We both graduated from high school and we tried smoking cigarettes for the first time and a few other things. And the next thing you know, within 6 weeks, Miss Leslie was pregnant, and the birth father and I were going to get married, but his parents had some different ideas about that. So he got sent away back to college, and I got sent to an unwed mother's home in Mobile, Alabama / Paris, France. I want you to know that was the word for all of my friends and family members. And I actually had family that was stationed in Paris, France, so that all the letters that I wrote, I sent to my cousins in Paris. They sent to my friends in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. My friends sent to my cousins in Paris. She sent to me in Mobile, Alabama. My mother sent me off with a packet of records so that I would learn French while I was away, because, all my friends were going to quiz me, right? And have me speak to them in French. So anyway, the links that we went to back in the day are mind-boggling, and you have to be my age to be able to know what all that was about. But there I went. I actually didn't have a god-awful experience in the Catholic maternity home, as some people did, but I went through the pregnancy, I nested, I sewed, I crocheted, I hadn't a clue what was coming, and God forbid that my doctor would have told me about anything. They didn't do that either. So when one night I started having a stomach ache, sister said, oh, well, time for you to go to the hospital, threw me in the car, drove me to Providence Hospital, opened the door and said, go admit yourself. I was 17, but really more like 12, and I went in the hospital by myself, admitted myself. And that's where I learned the words that meant prep before you have a baby. Doctor forgot to mention that too. Should have seen my eyes out on sticks. But then after the prep, I will say they did that in a private room where they, I don't know, they shave you for guys maybe that are here that don't know what all that's about, and give you an enema and all these things so that you'll be easy and swift on the delivery table. And they put me in the hallway, the general hallway of the hospital to labor, because I couldn't go into the maternity ward because it was only for married women. And, you know, I was a sinner. So I labored in the hallway with people walking by until hours, I guess. A nurse walked along and lifted up the sheet and said, "Oh, you're crowning. Why didn't you say anything?" Like, what's crowning? I don't know. You didn't tell me I was supposed to call you for anything. So the next thing I know, they whisked me into the delivery room, knocked the lights out. And I think it was probably middle of the night by now. I'm not certain because I went over about 7 o'clock in the evening. But anyway, and I woke up the next morning and my parents were hanging over my bed and said, "You had a little boy." They wouldn't let your parents come prior to your delivery either. I think that was, they didn't want anybody getting together and having any conversations about maybe we could make a different choice here. I'm not sure. Anyway, I gave birth to my son. I had no idea, sorry, what motherhood was about until I saw that little precious baby looking back at me in my lap, and he was half me and half his birth dad. In fact, his feet were so big, my mother had to go 3 times to the store to get booties to fit him for his christening. His father had size 13 feet. And I swear Pete was born with size 12. But anyway, then it got really hard, but they didn't let you stay long. And so I was whisked out in a few days and sent home. I only gained 18 pounds during my pregnancy. I don't remember that was some big particular effort, other than there was a lot of conversation amongst the girls about, you know, I got to get back in my clothes. I can't look like I was just pregnant. So I presume I had some of that going on. But I was sent away with my marching orders, which any of you moms that were in a maternity home or worked with a social worker were also given. Just pretend this is a bad dream. You're going to go on and have other children. You don't need to remember this. Just go on with your life and everything will be fine. I was in graduate school when I realized that they had just given me an assignment to disassociate from myself, which is a psychological condition that is highly not recommended. But that's what they told me. And that's what I did, because I felt I had sinned so terribly. Catholic girl, remember, parents were very supportive and very kind to me, but I felt like I had tarnished their names, and anything I could do to get back in their good graces was what I wanted to do. So I went off and promised myself I would forget this, and I started college, and that actually became my opportunity at redemption. I'm the first college graduate in my family. And so that was number one. But number two, here was something I could do well, and you didn't get pregnant from it. And so maybe this was a good place to keep me, and I could prove that I was a worthwhile human being. So I went into a life where I just split off. There was my professional me, who did do good work and did get good recognition and got lots of neat opportunities. The agency I worked with paid for me to go full ride to Tulane for graduate school. I got a lot of kudos, and that felt good after feeling like I had disappointed so much. By the way, I just split off and forgot part 2 of the story there. Hang on, let me back up to tell you that first year in college, Mom sent me to a Catholic girls' school. How can you get pregnant at a Catholic girls' school, right? Wrong. All you have to do is have an old boyfriend come visit you, and in one night, and everybody always hears me add this because I love it, and 1 pint he and I split a pint of Rebel Yell. I don't remember anything except that 6 weeks later, he was shipped to Vietnam and I was throwing up. And it was like, oh my God, I can't tell anybody this. I mean, we could forgive you once, Leslie, but how stupid does a person have to be to get pregnant twice? And so I told no one about that pregnancy. I managed to stay home that year from college. I went to a junior college at home, and I delivered my son myself in the bathroom. And when my parents came home from work that night and knocked on the door, they were like, Leslie, are you okay? And I said, not exactly. I have a baby in here with me. And they were like, okay, open the door. My mother later told me she thought, because every time I saw a baby, I would just, dissolve into tears, that I had gone off the rails and maybe kidnapped somebody's child. But then when she saw the blood and the gore everywhere, she said, oh, no, I think she had this baby. So I did. And the next morning, a nurse friend of my mother's came and got him and took him to an adoption agency, and nobody ever asked me any questions. And a couple of months later, I do not remember it, but I did sign papers and signed him away. So big gap. See how easy you can forget these important things when you're not even trying. So now you see why I went on to college and was looking for every chance I could possibly find to redeem myself, because I felt like the lowest scum of the earth. And so school was a way out. Plus, I'd met a couple of social workers along the way, and I did think, good God, if I've survived this, certainly I can sit with other people that are going through whatever their life traumas are, and certainly I can help out with them some way. So that's what I did. And as I said, I split off. I had a professional life, and then I had my own personal life, which probably wasn't too different from people in the 70s. It was a little wild and woolly here and there, I will admit, but I never was looking for any relationships that would be long lasting. It's like that Groucho Marx joke, if they knew me, they wouldn't want to be with me. So I just kind of played the field and did my thing. In my 30s, I began to think how badly I wanted children, and I always thought I would raise some children, and gosh darn it, that's what they told me I would get to do. I would get to raise my own children. So I did meet a man. I was about 39. We got married when I was 40, and we knew we didn't have a lot of time left. So we were at the IVF clinic before the wedding to see if all the parts were still in working order. And guess what? They were. The only things was the tubes had gotten a little clogged over the years, and they said, we don't have time for surgery, but we will take your husband's sperm, your eggs, put them in the Petri dish. And I got pregnant the first time in vitro. Now, I say that carefully. I mean, I make a bad joke about it. I say I didn't have an infertility problem. I had a fertility problem. But I don't say that in any demeaning way to people who have infertility problems, because they're horrible. It's an awful, awful thing to deal with. But I was lucky, got pregnant with the first set of twins, lost them. But I knew it all worked. So I felt very relieved. And then in 1990, our twins were born. I was 43. I always have to put in my claim to fame. My son Elliot weighed 8 pounds and 11 ounces. He was a twin, carried full term. My daughter weighed 6.5. And my doctor said to me, not bad for an old racehorse. And I said, you watch your mouth. I held them to the due date. I did better than all those little chippies that were delivering babies down there. So whatever. I do remember that my OB at the maternity home, my doctor, when I left, he said to me, well, your body, you're just built for having babies. But the one thing I want to tell you is don't tell the future man that you marry about this. No man wants damaged goods. So know that all of us in that era had a lot of extra voices. If we got to feeling good about ourselves, it could take us down several pegs with just a comment or two. Anyway, had those twins. I was in heaven. And about 18 months in, I started sinking into a really severe depression. I was watching them go through all the developmental stages, and it was becoming clear as glass what I had missed with my two boys, and I couldn't push it away anymore. Plus, I was having some difficulty feeling attached to these new babies. Part of it was because I was working so hard, I never had time, but truly, it was also everything I'd been through. So I got my buns back in therapy, and I began talking. And I realized at some point that I was going to have to search for my sons. I needed to be sure that they were okay. And I said that to my husband. I said, you know, I'm going to have to search for the boys. And he said, oh, okay. Well, let's see. We just got married and we had twins and they're 2. And you want to now search for your 25 and 26-year-old sons. And I said, well, he said, could you possibly wait till they get in kindergarten? Because if you could do that, that would, I think that would give us some time to, wrap our heads around it. Greatest gift I ever got. That falls under what I'm going to talk to you about, gifts, because that gave me 5 years to learn everything I could about adoption. And I was so deep in the fog, just as deep as probably all of us were. But so I went to Cub. Anne wrote it in the book. My husband said he put one woman on the plane to her first Cub conference and he picked up somebody entirely different who came home. And I spent the weekend going around saying, hello, I'm Leslie Mackinnon. I gave up 2 children for adoption. I'm Leslie Mackinnon. I gave up 2 children for adoption. And Ricky Solinger looked at me like, honey, you got a few screws loose. But I knew that I had one weekend to say this out loud. I'd never said it before, and I had to practice it as many times as I could so that I could shake this off and get used to saying it. And again, that was my saving grace. I say sometimes that I think it was, what's his name? Anyway, the truth will set you free. Oh my God. As I began to tell the truth, as I spoke at Cub and I was in different support groups and Joyce asked me to come and talk at Cape Cod, it was like I could feel bricks falling off my back. It was like I'm getting lighter. I still feel ashamed to this day. I want to assure you, but it's like down here, and it was overpowering before. And it's been such a gift to let my truth out. I'd kept myself in isolation for 30 years. And in that isolation, what I did was just beat myself to a pulp in my mind, just always telling myself, if they really knew you, they wouldn't still be around. So coming out and being able to talk, I also joined the first 2 groups I'd never been a member of a group, if you will. Because again, I thought, well, if you join a group, then they'll get to know you. And if they get to know you, they'll ask for these gaps in your history and so forth. But I joined AA, and I remember the thought, my drinking wasn't out of control, but I could see what was on the horizon. I come from a very addictive family background, and I could see my drinking getting way too regular. But the thought that I kept having was, I have to be sober when I meet them. I have to feel this. I haven't felt anything up till now, and I have got to feel this. So AA was the first group, and where I felt accepted and loved. And the next was the adoption community, where you all know, with welcome arms, you are invited to come in and you are understood. And people love you for just who you are. And I looked around at other people, some who are in this room. When I met Mimi Janes, it was like, well, she did what I did, and she's a really nice lady. So maybe that means there's something okay about me again. So it was just so freeing in every way to meet my community, and I will never leave this community. This is my family, and I thank you guys for being here. During this time, I was even able to reframe. I'd always put myself down so about delivering my son Keith, and one day I was reading how American Indian women gave birth while they were out in the fields and they felt labor coming on. They would move over to the side, dig a deep hole and give birth, and then wrap the baby up and put the baby on their back and go on. And I thought, wait a minute, my own midwife delivered my own child. Nothing I can't do. I'm a warrior woman. Now, it doesn't always stay that strong, but it was like, wow, I'm powerful. And I'm more powerful now that I got my voice back, obviously. So eventually, all this sharing changed my entire career. I'd always been a social worker. I'd worked with families, I'd worked with adolescents. But once I really learned what all this stuff in adoption was about, I began to think, well, I guess this is what I was meant to do. And it's been so incredible to be able to, because the focus of my work has been reconnecting people. And that is such a gift. I'm just spoke to a person at a recent conference who I had trained, and she said, I'm doing reunions left and right, Leslie. And it's like, I keep feeling like well, she didn't say this. I always say, I feel like I need to pay them for the help. It's like, it's such a gift to be involved in that with other people. It's magical. You think it's magical going through it, but just to be your observer, just to be your witness is some kind of a miracle. It really is. So this is where I say some good came out of this too, for me anyway. I think initially, but let me back up and say one other thing. During this time, the infertility clinic called me and said, by the way, you have 4 leftover embryos, and we assumed you'd like to donate them to a childless couple. And I was like, hold the phone. Wait a minute. I think I've been at this crossroads before. No, I don't think I would. But I put them on a little bit and I asked them some questions, which again, some of you have heard me talk about these questions, but I asked them, would you give the children, these embryos, the information about their birth parents? If we will be completely open, we would love to hear from them, yada, yada. Would you do that? Oh, absolutely not. We're not getting into all that record keeping. God forbid somebody find out where they came from. And then the second one was, well, you wouldn't place them here in Atlanta, would you? Would you place them out of town? And they were like, why? And I said, so they don't grow up and marry their siblings, full-blooded. No, we're not doing any of that stuff. That's all in the record. Nah, that's no. So I wasn't going to anyway, but I obviously did not donate my embryos. And people always want to know. And what I finally ended up doing, I found a Catholic technicality. And believe you me, we Catholics have a lot of technicalities that they're workarounds. And I read one day about, well, an embryo frozen over here in this tube is not a living thing. It's a frozen being, and it's not living until you hook it up with a nice warm uterus. And I said, okay. So I gave my embryos to medical science and let them thaw them out. And probably they found nothing, but that was what I did. Anyway, so in these early years of my new career at 50, here I am with a brand new career of helping people in the adoption world, but I kept trying to bring in this third-party reproduction world because I saw them making all the same mistakes that adoption made in spades. My doctor was telling mothers who were carrying donated embryos, there's no need to tell them you're carrying the baby. They'll never need to know. And I'm like, you are a medical doctor, right? And it was like, they used to ask me to come speak a lot at some of their events, but once I made a few comments like that, they quit asking me to come. Do tell. Anyway, so my focus is, just like Amber said, in trying to get society to be able to see the reality of adoption, what all is involved, and the reality of third-party reproduction. My passion has also been about educating as many therapists as possible before I end on this earth, because we all know how hard that is to find a therapist who knows what we're talking about. So those are the two things I think I have focused on the most, is education generally, but education for therapists too. And by the way, along the way, all that 5 years I mentioned where I was reading and studying and learning, it was an accidental gift I received. But it's something that I always try to emphasize to people, because reunion is such a biggie, and I'm going to talk about it just as I wind up here. In the activism part of things, people get so excited. I found I did a DNA test. I found them. Where's the phone book? Let me call them. And you really need to prepare. If you want to have a reunion that has a chance of success, you need to know what you're doing. It is the biggest emotional event that ever occurred in my life. And I had twins. I delivered my own child. I had my first child, and no offense to you four, but reunion turned me upside down even further. And giving birth was incredible. And I had the oxytocin flowing, but reunion, I had that oxytocin flowing probably for months. So it's a big deal, and we do need to be prepared for it. And the last thing I wanted to say is you also have to be prepared for the long haul. I think because of how much time I had to prepare, I was lucky, and I had 2 really decent reunions take off, and one is still going strong, and he may show up here on the screen in a minute, and he may not, but the other one was cut off at 19 years. It was good while it lasted, and then my son decided he was done. I always remember what Nancy Verrier said, is that sometimes an adopted individual will cut off the birth family after a period of time. Especially, she made some comment about how it happened in kind of like the same length of time you cut them off. The only connection I could make was I was 19 when I gave birth to that son, and we were in reunion for 19 years, and we haven't spoken since then. But I still love him. I occasionally sneak a little gift to him because he'd prefer I don't. So I send it in ways that he doesn't know it's me when it's coming. And I haven't had any of those returned, as I had a few other things. And I respect his wishes. I wish I didn't understand them so well, and I do. And I will continue to respect them. But don't count on anything forever. I guess that's the message. So the last piece of what I want to talk about is the activism. And I think that is such an important part of our healing, because I don't know about you, but my mother used to say, if God gives you lemons, make lemonade. And I always reflect on the women who started MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, because their kids were gone. There was nothing they could do. A drunk driver had killed their child, but they had to do something to try to survive that. And if they could help someone else not have to go through with what they went through, then that would do it. And we all know this. This is basic. How do you feel better about yourself? You help somebody else. That's not a mind breaker. So I think it's so important that we in this community do it. And I think we do it well, by the way. I love how we do this with one another and try to educate the young ones, the new ones, whatever age coming in. But there are stages of our coming out of the fog, if you will, that all of us have to go through. I do remember being in a rage for several years when I learned what adoption had done to my big boys. I had no clue. I certainly didn't get that in the brochure. And when I saw it, it was very painful. And when I saw them and some of the struggles they'd had in their lifetime, it was right there before me. And then we go through and nobody expects this, oh, hi, now you're in reunion. So everybody's happy and everybody lived happily ever after and it's all wonderful. And of course it's not. We go through great periods of grief and downers of what all we lost when we see these wonderful human beings that we hadn't known all this time. We go through euphoria. We get, just giddy with one another, spending time. So there's a whole lot of emotional reaction to reunion. And it gets in our way when we come to this place in talking about activism. Because, who's heard this before? We eat our own in this realm here. We can get so angry, so upset with one another that we just tear each other apart. I turned 75 last year, and I never liked being in that place. And I don't think anybody else does either, when people are so angry and cutting each other down. But I don't have time for it anymore. I don't want to hear about it anymore. And I know it's a stage and I respect it and people have to go through it. I wish we could find some better ways to help them get through it, because I don't think staying there is doing them any good. But that's not my job to have to tell them how to handle it. But I know I don't have time for it. And that's why I want to do everything I can to change things and to get active about doing it. So that we get somewhere, just like we are getting somewhere, as I've been saying. I think the field is maturing. I don't think everything about social media is wonderful, but it has helped us connect, hasn't it? I mean, it's amazing how we can connect in all our little dyads and triads and different groups. We can get the kind of support that we need. I see all the podcasts and the social media groups online, the Facebook groups, and people doing documentaries and films. And I mean, and those are getting posted online. There's several coming up in the next few weeks that I can't wait to see. And so I think with all this, we really are reaching not just us, but the public at large. We really are starting to make a dent in things. People are seeing it differently. My daughter has a 2-year-old, and her nanny asked me one day, you know, what do you do? I heard you're a therapist, blah, blah. And I said adoption, and I usually follow that with a line, not the rainbows and butterfly type of adoption before, you know, because everybody goes, oh, you do adoptions. And I go, no, I do recovery from adoption. But she said to me, oh, wait a minute. I've been hearing all these young people on TikTok. Well, she didn't say young people because they were her age, but I've been hearing all these people on TikTok, and not all adoptees like being adopted. Do tell. But it was like, then she started educating me, and I loved it. So again, Instagram, whatever it is, we're getting out there. I can't even maneuver in all these different social media places, but the world is changing. And I think we're really doing such a better job at connecting with one another. And that's a good thing, because the older I've gotten, the bigger this picture gets. This isn't just about adoption or third-party reproduction. This is about women. This is about poverty. This is about so many things, politics, religious beliefs. We aren't just fighting agencies. That's what I thought when I started. And there are good agencies out there too. I don't want to act like there aren't, but we are fighting something on a much larger scale. And that doesn't bother me, because I think right now where our world is, we're fighting a hell of a lot of things on a pretty big scale, people. And there has got to be some kind of turnaround, or else we don't have to worry, because we're not going to be here anymore. That's how I feel about it. So yes, it's even bigger than I ever would imagined. I remember this book coach I was working with, one of these days, I'm going to finish this book. And I said, but I started off wanting to write a book about adoption and tell people what I'd learned and how it relates to this other form of family building, you know, using technology. And now I realize I'm talking about something so much bigger. So in social work, we hear macro and micro all the time, the systems that you're looking at, but we got to do both. And I think my formerly micro viewpoint of changing the adoption community is relevant. It is something we need to do. We need to educate the people that are living in it and help them. But we also have to go bigger, because it's way bigger than that. We just did a conference, NAAP and the Right to Know, did what we call this summit. And that was my dream for bringing those two family making communities together, because we had so much in common. And again, we can groan and moan and be mad at each other, or we can pull it together and see what change we can affect. And we're always going to change more with greater numbers. From the summit, we're now going to be reaching out to even larger groups. I'm in a couple of little study groups that are looking at how we can do this. And that is, I know that Jennifer from NAAP and Cara from Right to Know are going to be presenting at a big genealogy conference this next year. And that sounds, yeah, but that's really related. But trust me, they don't all understand about what our communities have been going through, but they're starting to get the picture. There are so many larger groups. I just met with a group of people that are starting to stand up and fight back to residential treatment centers for adolescents. It's become such a huge business. And I did some training at some of these residential treatment centers before I left Atlanta in the past decade. And guess what? this will come as no surprise, but somewhere between 60 and 80% of their population are adoptees. Go figure. Okay, because that's the developmental age, adolescence of identity. And if you don't have all your identity pieces, adolescence is going to be hard enough anyway. But without that, you are really got a hand tied behind your back. But this group, I was fascinated because my other area of interest is civil rights, was fighting because residential treatment centers had become such a business and they were making such money. And I said, this is reminding me of the cradle to prison pipeline somehow. People, are we just making future residents to make money? I don't know. I don't know what all this is underneath it, but I do know that there are other groups that we need to be coming together with because they're beginning to question some of this on a much larger scale, like I'm talking about poverty and women's rights and, you know, what we're setting kids up for without their families having enough information to know how to help them. So I think there's tons of room in this activism field. There are so many areas where all you've got to do is find your little niche, the thing that's the most important to you, that always catches your attention, and work on it. There's enough work for all of us. I'm going to tell you just the 2 or 3 things that I'm focusing on now, because I am going to slow it down. As I was telling Amber, I'm not leaving. This is my family. I've never had a family like this before. So I'm here till I'm not. But I would like to not have to work quite so hard. So I got a few projects on my project board. And one is to clarify that women are still being coerced in when they have a crisis pregnancy. We've dressed it up. It's a lot prettier, but they still hand out that stupid sheet of paper to a pregnant woman and say, list all the things that you can provide for this baby, and then list all the things that the recipient couple or the, you know, adoptive parents can provide. They did that with me in 1966. Come on. They need to be coming in saying, how can we help you raise your child? What can we do to make this possible for you? How can we give you confidence in yourself? And yet they don't. They're isolating women and preying on their feelings of vulnerability. And I don't know a woman in the world that's about to have a baby, and especially if she's young, and especially if she's poor, and especially if her partner walked out on her, that isn't terrified. So it's very easy for somebody to come in there and play on that terror. So that's one of my biggies. I'm doing a webinar for therapists on how to counsel women that are going through a crisis pregnancy and are considering adoption. I'm showing them how to give them real options, not here's an adoption agency. Oh, you're not interested in that? Well, you know, I think there's something called WIC. You might be able to get some free milk. Good luck with that. But I'm trying to work out a program where you can really give a woman options and things to do. There's a documentary being made. Lisa Elaine Scott is making a documentary on women still being coerced today. And I've been involved and been helping her with that. That's going to go out to a broader view. My first is just to the therapist, the next to a broader view to tell people, hey, it's still happening. There's a Catholic mothers group, and last couple of years ago we made a little video. We get called every year, asked to, you know, can you please come to Georgia or Florida or somewhere and tell these legislators that you do want to be found? Well, we can't get everywhere, plus we're getting older, and so because, you know, they're busy protecting us older mothers' confidentiality. Yeah, right. My name was all over my son's paperwork. That's how they protected me. But we made a video that, and we're going to remake it this summer, that can be shown at any legislative efforts to, you know, get open birth certificates. And we're saying, yoo-hoo, nobody asked us anything. And yes, we want to meet them. And there are only 1% of mothers who reject. So get over yourselves. So that's another something I've been working on. And the last thing, and I'm pretty big on this, and I'm not going to go into it, I'm going to turn this over to a discussion, but genetic attraction, which is I call it adoption made, third-party technology made condition. When you separate people when they're very young and they don't grow up together and they don't get to develop the incest taboo, this occurrence can happen where they become romantically interested in one another. And it is a horror show just waiting to happen. And it happens, I don't know to how many people, because do you know how much research has ever been done on it? One research study in the 1990s of 40 people. Okay. But we've been talking about it since 1970. Come on, people. We need research and we need more information getting out ahead of time. You talk about preparing in reunion for it probably won't happen, but it could. I reunited because Joyce taught me how to do it with kids. And I'd say to teenagers, you know, now there's this thing that sometimes happens and it probably won't happen, but, you know, either an attraction between an adoptee and their parent or an adoptee and their half sibling. And of course, the kids would all go, ew, Leslie, you know, what's the matter with you? And I said, it won't happen. It won't happen. But if you hear about it ahead of time, and it does happen, at least you can go, wait a minute, somebody said something to me about that. Is there a paper on that? Is there anything I can go read? Because if it happens, it typically destroys. It doesn't just end the reunion, it destroys whatever family connections were made, both sides. It's horrific. So that's my other, and if you notice, I'm doing my best to take sexual out of that phrase I use. I'm calling it genetic attraction. Why? Because for the last few years, anybody that asked me to speak, this is the topic I want to speak on, because this is something I want to get done before I sit back a little. I want you to know people in the adoption community don't want me to come speak on this. Oh, nobody will want reunions with us if you talk about it. Okay, well then let's not talk about it and see where that got us. Got us all right here, guys, not talking. So I'm trying to take sexual out because that seems to be the offending term. God, we still can't talk about sex or money. But anyway, I think I just add that it can get romantic. Do with it what you will. We tried to think of a bunch of different terms, and I just think that's going to be more trouble than it's worth getting people used to something else. So like I said, I'm calling it genetic attraction, but those are the things I'm working on and will be working on. And I want to hear what you guys want to do or thinking about. Any questions you have? I'm good.
Okay. Please think of your questions. I got a few from the chat.
Okay.
So first of all, thank you so much. That was so great. And there's a lot going on in the chat if you want to catch up on that. The first question was, when did you tell your husband about your first two sons? And
people always ask me that. They said, did you tell him before you got married? And I said, are you kidding me? That was the litmus test. I was engaged to a guy who forgave me. That ended that one.
Oh, man.
Bye, dear. You forgave me. You weren't even there. There were a few other things that that ended it too. But yes, I told my husband before I got married, and he has been incredible. He just opened the door and made room. And he's now being called. For a long time, he couldn't decide, well, who am I? What do they call me? And he kind of called himself their stepdad. But now I saw it online and I said, wouldn't you rather be their bonus dad? And he said, oh, I like that. That sounds good. And so I asked my oldest son, and it was like, yeah, that's okay. I can use a bonus dad. So yes, I did
so
tell him.
sweet. That's
Good
good.
question.
Okay. Someone else was asking, you had made a comment about there being good agencies, and there's been some chat in here back and forth, but someone had said that that sounds like an oxymoron. Would you speak more on what makes a good agency?
Okay. Yes. And I try to be fair. And I thought, oh God, don't ask me the name of one. There's one I used to work with up in the Northeast somewhere. But what makes a good agency is one that really works with women and provides options. And they're very, very few. But there are a few. At the very least, that won't take anybody unless it's an open adoption.
Yes.
I know that in my practice, it took me about 5 years to get the chutzpah to say, I don't work with you unless you want to do an open adoption. And I'm going to tell you why, because that's what's best for your child. And if you are truly doing this, as we all give lip service to your child, what's in the best interest of your child is an open adoption. And is that going to fix everything? And is that going to mean they have no issues? Not at all. So an agency that also has a great deal of respect and regard for a birth parent, so they can help the birth parent navigate the openness later, because we all know how that often goes. And even when it goes, even when the family didn't shut it down, sometimes they inadvertently make it so difficult for the birth mom or birth family to be a part of things by calling at the last minute. And God knows, if you've raised children, you know, you can't plan it all ahead. There are realistic difficulties that come up, but we need agencies that really value the birth family as an integral part of this whole relationship. And don't even get me started in third-party reproduction yet, because they got so far to go with all this. But anyway, that's what I would say about a good agency.
I love that. I will say I have personal experience with 2 somewhat big agencies here locally, and they do some cooperation together, but one I do appreciate, and they only work with couples if they agree to openness, and then they do really intensive education prior to any adoption, and they provide lifelong free resources for all parties involved.
Good. Tell you, just as an aside, just last week, I saw a little notice, some young birth mothers chatting about their open adoptions closing. And they were saying, do you think there's any way we could get together and sue Bethany for not providing us with the information that this could happen, for misleading us and this, that, the other? And I'm like over here in the corner, go girl, go girl. They can, but you know,
Right.
Yeah, hold people accountable.
Yeah. Okay, I had one question, and then there's another one after that. I'm not going to give any details to the person in the comments. I'm just curious, you've spent so much time speaking to all sorts of audiences. What has been the reception from the general public to what you have to say? And
the general public, do you mean, or do you mean our?
Well, I mean both, I guess, but I'm curious what the reception is among people who maybe are hearing this for the first time, and yeah.
As you'd expect, and I do less speaking to the general public, I will admit. Recently, somebody asked me to come talk to the Asheville Association of Accredited University Women. Okay. And so I get a little mixture of both, of people coming up afterwards saying, you know, now this all makes sense because I have a niece that was adopted and I thought I knew she had an issue with it at all until about 4 years ago. And then she went and found her birth family, and then she's had a good reunion. And then I get out of that same audience of, oh no, well, my nephew adopted a child and he's 2 and he is perfectly happy. And he is, and there is nothing wrong and they are just doing a great job. And I don't know about some of those things you said. So I get a little mixed review in that public. Of course, in our community, as I've been saying for years, we're preaching to the choir.
Right.
But the choir gets bigger and then they can preach to the choir. And I recently heard this week from a school teacher who had heard me on a podcast and said, you're the first person I ever heard mention how much school teachers could impact us. She hadn't heard you yet, Joyce. She said, I'm thinking about this and can I go to that conference? And I said, you don't know how it heartens me to hear from you, because one of the things, and I think it's with age, I'm realizing is one by one, if you heard me and that changed you, and you go out there and you talk to 10 more kids in your teaching career, she looked young, that are adopted, that's 10 more lives you touched. And even if it's one at a time, we're getting there.
Yeah.
So I don't think preaching to the choir is ever a bad thing. And especially if it gets us energized to say, hey, I can find something in all of this I could be doing, and it would really help. You can't get on an elevator. I was at the summit in Louisville and somebody said, well, what kind of a conference is this? And I said, oh, it's about adoption and third-party reproduction. And of course, the poor people in the elevator went, yeah. And I said, no.
Oh, that's great.
Because it's just an elevator. I only had 2 floors to try to get it out. That, nope, there's another side to this. You should come see us.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. That is so good. Okay, I have an anonymous question here. If you are comfortable sharing, they were wondering if you had any personal experience with genetic attraction in your kids.
Oh, I love to tell my stories because I'm lucky enough that they didn't get all the way to another side. But here's how it goes, guys. The first time I visited my son, I was out of my gourd with excitement. We'd only met like 2 or 3 weeks before. I went to his house. I stayed for the weekend. I couldn't sleep on a Sunday morning. I was just wired. And I got up and I'm laying on the sofa reading the Sunday paper. And he kept walking by the hallway. And he'd go and then he'd come back. And finally stopped in the door and he said, I don't think I'm going to be able to get this out of my head unless I say it. And I said, what, sweetie? And he said, I'm having the biggest urge to crawl in your lap and have you read me the funnies. Mm-hmm. Now, that was a Sunday morning. If I hadn't decided to stop drinking, and that was a Sunday night, and we were each having a cocktail and we were getting closey-wosey, you can see how things could happen. That was developmental regression. Okay. And that's, in my belief, don't have the research to support it, exactly what's happening in genetic attraction. You remember the Oedipal complex and the Electra complex? They're real. We have boy-girl twins. My daughter was Smash-O for her daddy. He, hung the moon. And if she could have moved me out of the picture, she would have. So it can just move over into that ever so easily. But that's what I think is the beginnings of it.
Mm.
The only question no, I'm not even going to do that. Somebody asked me a question once in a packed room, but anyway, I'm not going to say what it was because I didn't answer it, and I'm not going to even mention it now, but thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. Okay. Yeah, there's some comments. Does anyone feel free to raise your hand or just speak out if anyone else has a comment? Joyce?
This is so great, Leslie. I'm so glad you're out there doing all of this. And you know, when Amber asked about general public, what jumped into my mind is I used to do trainings for probate and family court judges, and it was always at a golf course, of course. And so I would be there to illuminate what was going on with all their little adoptions. And I explained that the birth certificate is altered. And I asked an aside, this is a legal question, how is that legal? It's a document that's being falsified, and it seems everyone seems okay with it. And I have to tell you, there were always judges there who had no idea that happened and who were horrified.
Wow.
So it's, you know, I mean, you don't know what people don't know. It's incredible. So I think that, and I also want to say, Leslie, that the genetic attraction thing, I was on a crazy British TV show in the 1980s called Antenna. It was like Nova, it was a science program. And the title of my episode that I was in was Dangerous Reunions. And you know the Brits, it started with a Wagnerian opera and with a brother and sister attracted to each other. And it was like the weirdest thing ever. But it was their whole rendition of what happens. And they made it so sordid and horrible. It was just terrible. So, I mean, I think we can teach people without horrifying and scaring them to death, but we have to teach them.
Yeah, yeah. And Joyce, the point you made, and am I mute? Did I mute?
No,
okay. The point you made about people still not understanding about the altered birth certificate, that's stunning to me. Mm-hmm. How many people don't get it? And that, to me, is a good entry point for, oh, well, I wonder if you knew about this. And then I have so much more just than that I can tell you too. But it's stunning. Professionals that are so associated with this whole adoption business and don't understand that.
But one last thing, there are also adopted parents who up until the actual adoption don't know that they're getting this fake birth certificate.
Yeah,
they're completely surprised by it.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And it's something that they're not enlightened about. And they might be more of an ally to us if they had some information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I wanted to ask Desiree, I saw you had your hand up, but you took it down. I just wanted to check and see if you had something. You're on mute.
I'm going to just type it in. It's not a question, it's just a comment. So I'll just type it in the chat. Yeah.
All right, Darren.
Hey, Leslie. Thank you for sharing your story again. I've heard more about it this time, and I really appreciate the way you share. I was in Canada a few weeks ago, and I got to spend a few days with a paternal brother that I'm close with, but we still meet in secret from our birth father because he's never acknowledged me, which is fine. But after I got back from Canada, about a week later, I got a letter from my birth mother, and I cut ties with her 7.5 years ago, and I said, don't contact me or my wife because the relationship was too toxic. And my wife read the letter. I didn't read it, but in the letter she said, my birth mother said I should be more thankful for, or grateful or thankful for what my adoptive parents did for me. And that really pissed me off. being told the grateful, be grateful narrative. And, you know, she's never dealt with her trauma with adoption. She's never gone to therapy to deal with it. And I waited a few days and I said, you know what? You don't have the right to tell me that. You gave up the right to tell me what to do back in 1970 when I was born. And I also said, you know, I told you to leave me alone. I'm not interested because she's just very toxic, very narcissistic. And I think really what I thought later was I'm afraid if I engaged with her again, she's just going to leave because she rejected me 6 times during 20 years of reunion. And I just thought, you know, it's really not worth staying in contact because it's just not healthy. And I guess, and I think she was also upset that I didn't contact her when I was up there, which I had no intention of doing. I wanted to focus on people I know and love. I stayed with my son's mother in Calgary, and when I was up there, I had the opportunity to apologize to my son because I was an absentee father in his life, and I felt there was some tension with him between us, and I apologized and I said, you know, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you and for how that affected you. And he was very grateful for that. He deserved an apology a long time ago. And I just wanted to focus on him. His mother was recently diagnosed with cancer, and that's been a struggle because he and his mom are very close. And I don't know, I sometimes I wonder, should I reach out to my birth mother again? And then I just think of the whole picture, and I think of it a few little breadcrumbs on top of a toxic pile of emotional crap. And then I just remind myself this is what will probably happen if I engage with her again.
And Darren, I want to respond to that because I think, look what you learned from your mother. I'm doubting you ever got that apology. I apologized to both my sons, both of whom said, you know, it didn't matter. Yeah, right, it didn't matter. But I apologized. And I was, again, just in my early 30s when I'm talking to a very close friend of mine, and she looked at me and I was talking about my growing up, and my mother lost custody of me when I was 5, and I didn't see her again till I was going into puberty. And she said, you did just what your mom did. And I went, oh, crap. I've been paying this shrink megabucks for years, and he never helped me with that intergenerational trauma piece, because my sister and I lost contact with my mother, and then I grew up and gave up my sons. And my mother was a good woman, but she came from a generation of you would never apologize to your children because you were the parent. And one of the best things I ever learned from her was how to apologize to my kids when I spewed all over them, or I lost it, or I did things wrong. And when I finally met my sons, to at least offer an apology, whether they wanted it or not, I thought it was important that it be said. So I hear you, and I saw what you did with your son, and I was really in awe of you for doing that. I think it's important no matter what the response is.
Very wise. Okay, Diana.
Hi, Leslie. Hi, everybody.
Hey,
I just attended for the first time my first conference was the summit. I met some of you. I met a lot of people, but I didn't meet a lot of people. It was great. It was wonderful. And I was talking to two ladies that were visiting down, and I live in Pawleys Island. It's a beach area. They're visiting from upstate New York. And the lady says, well, I'm from Plattsburgh. I said, well, that's where they brought me through. You see, I was born in Canada, I found out, and I was on Black Market, and I was taken, the first stop was Plattsburgh. And then they went on to Lake Placid, and then I was exchanged. I was given to an American family. So she says, well, how do you know Plattsburgh? And I proceeded to tell her, and she says, oh my goodness, my children are adopted. I have 2 adopted children. And she asked me something. She says, well, what does your birth certificate say? I said to her, my birth certificate's a lie. Oh, that can't be. You can't, again, you can't. She says to me, oh, no, I have 2 adopted children. I have all their papers. You can't falsify legal documents like that. I got kind of quiet. I didn't know what to really say. And I said, well, I know better. If you want to, you could join. There's groups that I'm in. If you want to hear it from other people, not just me, we can educate you on it. Yes, my documents are false. So I was just really surprised, and she has 2 adopted children.
Has she read their birth certificates lately? It said she gave birth to them. Duh.
So we do know that papers can be false. I have a lot of false documents.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to, since you were talking about that earlier, this just happened to me today.
Wow.
I've heard it before. I've heard it from people that even worked for a judge in Canada. And I was like, no. They said, oh, no, they can't do that. I said, well, yes, they can.
Oh, yeah, they can.
So, well, thank you. It's just,
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mary. You're muted.
Thank
There
you. Sorry, I'm kind of out of it with this. I'm really glad to be here, and it's just been really wonderful to hear all of the perspective that you have from being a birth mom. I actually have gone through kind of the gamut. I'm 50, I'll be 59 in a few months. And I was adopted as a baby. And when I was in my 30s, I did a search for a birth family. Turned out my birth mom was not alive anymore. And but she had another boy she gave up for adoption. So I ended up having a lot of searches. So I had the search for my birth mom that turned out she wasn't alive, but I did get a lot of information. And I did find my birth grandma and aunt, and connected with them. And then they connected me with cousins that were local, because they were not local. And then I did the search for my brother, and I did find him. And then I did the search for my birth dad. And all of this, of course, was, through the way that you have to do this. I'm in Michigan. You have to, petition the court, be awarded the confidential intermediary, the whole gamut. I had the redacted adopted birth certificate. So there was no information. And I was obsessed with going to the church where I was baptized and pushing for information, hoping to get different people each time. And then I ended up getting my non-identifying information from Catholic charities. And then I did find my birth father and connected with him and reunited. So my reunions were pretty good. I did have a sister that my mother had after she did get married and had a daughter. And then when that daughter was like 11 and I would have been 15, she was in a car accident and killed. So that daughter was alive, but didn't choose to meet me ever. And then since then she has passed. So, I've had some of the good reunions, the not so good reunions. And then I met my birth dad, and he was very excited. The poor guy, I gotta tell you this is just kind of odd. And this sort of just wraps so many things that need to change into this one story of mine. And basically, so my mother named the wrong father on my birth certificate. And, all the paperwork from Catholic Charities. And so I got to know him for the last 26 years. Okay. And he actually, you know, was told he was birth dad. He and she together gave me up. He paid for her to go away, you know, in another town and, you know, to the unwed mother's home. And he went to Catholic Charities and they had like counseling sessions together and then separate. And then he would go there like on his lunch hour and pay and make payments for her to be, you know, away. And he went and visited her once. And so he told me all these things and how relieved he was and just all this, you know, think of how this affects, you know, affected him through his years. And he never told his sisters, my aunts, or his family. He had to tell his family, which there was a brother and a sister, and then his wife. And technically, you know, I had done also a lot of preparing. I read about every book, you know, the primal wound, everything you could imagine prior to searching. I was probably someday going to do it, but I wasn't going to do it when I did it. And my 10-year-old daughter was the one that told me I needed to do it. Now, when your 10-year-old daughter is smarter than you, you listen. And she's a social worker today. So, you know, she also was a 16-year-old mother who kept her child. Yeah, there's a lot of story in that too. But and a lot of tears and a lot of decision making on how to handle things, you know, because of emotions. But anyways, moving forward, my now 2018, I bought my 3 adult daughters and myself DNA kits. So we're throwing the DNA thing in here, right? So I'm not searching for anybody. For 26 years, I've gotten to know all of my family. I have all these documents, and it's like, I want to put it all. My sister that I was raised with, who is my adopted parents, adopted a boy, adopted me. And then when my mother was 40, had my sister. So they finally had their own child. So my sister had done an ancestry.com on my whole family. But I'm like, dude, this is not my family. Like, I've got all these documents. I need to do this. And so I thought, you know, for Christmas, this would be a great project thing to get my girls. And, you know, I was an empty nester and I was feeling a little bit down about nobody needs mama. So I thought this will be fun for everybody to get together online from wherever you're at and let's do this project and just have fun with it, you know, and then they could get their ethnicity levels. And, you know, like I've got mine right here. And I thought, how fun would this be? And then do their dad's side. And, you know, their grandma's from England, you know, so fun. Everybody loved their gifts. And my one middle daughter and I did ours right away. And in 3 weeks, normally it's supposed to be like 6 to 8 weeks, 3 weeks, I get my results. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can't wait to get on my pajamas and open up my computer and look at everything. And I see a close family match. And it looks exactly like my oldest daughter. And I look at the name and it's somebody else. And I'm like, who is this? And she's the same age. Like, you know, obviously my daughter's age. And I'm like, oh, I'm not liking this. I'm like, you know, my mind's going, okay, did my father have an affair? And now okay, that was my first thought. I'm like going, oh, his wife already doesn't like me. So this is not going to go well. And then, or did my brother, my half brother from my mother, did he have a child and he doesn't know? Because he certainly could have one that same age because we're only 18 months apart. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm throwing out a group text to my daughters and I'm like, what do you think? What do you think? Well, of course, it's like 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday. And it's January. Everybody's in bed for work the next day. Nobody's getting back with me. And I'm, you know, so I messaged the girl I don't know. I don't know if you know how we're matching as close family match, but if you do, please let me know. If not, we got something to figure out, basically. So I just kind of introduced myself that way. Next morning, she sends me this long message. Oh my gosh. She goes, I'm so glad I found you. She goes, you're my sister. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, no. I'm like, so I'm in denial because I already know everybody. And she's telling me her whole family, tree and everything, and how her dad, like had 5 different, wives, different times, and had 2 separate families. And that she was the youngest of the youngest family. And that's how I have a sister that age, and that I actually have older siblings, and that there's so many of them and all this. I'm just like, what? I'm like, no, I'm like, this can't be right. But I send them to my daughters, they're sending me Facebook pictures. They're like, psh, look at this one. Psh, look at this one. They're like, whoever she is, mom, she is us. She's related to us.
And Mary,
they're all related to us.
Mary, you sound like, yes, all the people in this third-party reproduction and in the MPE world, it's just peeling off like, oh, I have 28 new brothers and sisters, and oh, I have this. I'm gonna pause you just for a second because there's somebody else that wanted to throw something in.
Oh, sure. Yes, please do.
But thank you for sharing that, because that's the brave new world right now. Very much so.
Yeah. A wild story. I can't even.
Amy, did Amy go away? She had her hand up. I was just, oh, there she is. I wanted to be sure.
Sorry. I'm listening, but well, anyway, I just wanted to know, Leslie, as Darren was describing his story with his birth mom who's still in the fog, I always have this urge in listening to adoptees, to take as a birth mom, I know she must be whatever. I was just wondering, as a therapist, first of all, I was wondering what you would say to Darren in particular about should he or shouldn't he try with his birth mom again? But also just generally, how as a birth mom do you be fair? How do you not find yourself playing the role of that person's birth mom? I feel like it's a special thing that I get to do to kind of give them a special insight into how a birth mother might feel, but of course we all feel different.
Right.
Just curious.
Yeah. And it's an excellent question. And it's one of the things we learn as therapists of kind of like, and that's why I spent, I don't know, 5 or 6 years doing my own stuff, trying to work through, and you never work through it. I don't want to act like I finished my business, because that's not true, but so that I didn't project it on other people. Well, maybe your birth mother was this, maybe your birth mother was feeling that. We can't always know. I can tell you that I've known Darren for a while, and in his experience, he's made lots of efforts and he's gotten kind of lots of the same. And as painful as it is sometimes to sever a relationship that's already been severed for life, I think sometimes in our well-being, we have to do that. Like I have to sever myself from the news sometimes because it just gets me so upset. And even though I feel like I need to know what's going on, I don't need to be this churned up all the time. But that said, there are times to sever the relationship, and it's probably the healthiest. But I do think this is where it's so important for us to cross over, guys. I remember the first group I went to with adoptees in it, and there was a male adoptee who I saw his name on here earlier. He's always one of my favorites because it was my first group, and I sat with a man who was so angry with his birth mother. And that's the thing I'd been so afraid of. What would I do if they were so mad at me and they don't want to speak to me, or they want to cuss me out, or they want to whatever? And you know what? I sat there and listened to him, and I was okay. And I understood what he felt. and it was all right. And I walked out of that room, and he has been one of my favorite people ever since, because I learned so much from him that I couldn't learn from my own sons. So I do think that it's important to sometimes throw out there, well, she could be feeling this, or well, I can understand that. And then that other person can take that and do with it what they will. You know, we can't always say it is good to look at what the other side might be going through. But if the other side is not doing a whole lot to improve it, to learn more, to dig deep, then backing away sometimes is the best bet for the person themselves. I hate that we end up in cutoffs again, but sometimes that's all you can do.
Thank you so much for that, Leslie. Does anyone else have any closing comments or questions?
Y'all have been great.
Yes, this has been really good. Oh, actually, oh wait. Yes, okay, Luis.
I just want to say, if anybody has a chance, please go to Adoptees United and put your link in there against the California OBC bill. It is terrible. It's going to throw extra hurdles up. It's going to prevent people from connecting. It's only being sponsored and supported by PIs who make money off of us. So please tell your organizations, you individually get on there and tell them, no, this is a bad bill. Don't do it.
Thank you, Louise. And the other thing I want to say about Adoptees United is go to their site next week. Somebody help me out. I know you'll be able to hear Roxanne Agrazanian is going to be interviewed next week. She's the journalist who wrote the book about the birth families of the heart children that went off the cliff.
Oh.
Okay. And she is just opening up the door for the public on what's going on, the corruption in CPS. Please listen to her. Many of us that work in the field have been trying to say, guess what? Ever since 1997, they've been making money, CPS, by removing children from homes that don't need to be removed, or just putting children, automatically signing them up for adoption rather than trying to help family reunification. Same song, different lyrics, but here we go again. Poor people who, with a little help and a little support, might be able to support their families. So go watch that. And if somebody has the name of the book or the name of the journalist, please spit it out. I can't remember it, but I'm old. I have an excuse.
Okay, well, if that is everything, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. How can people connect with you if they so wish, Leslie?
Leslie Pate McKinnon at gmail.com, or Google Leslie Pate McKinnon and you'll grab my website and it'll give you an email for me. Glad to. I get all kinds of interesting emails from people, like I said, from the teacher this last week, and got one from somebody today, so feel free.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. This has been so great. It's been 1 year since we've had this group going this month. So the next meeting we have it's the second Thursday in each month, except for this month. So I think that's May 11th. We'll have a support group. And and I need to stop this recording. Thank you so much for everyone who showed up, and